Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 928th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Brooklyn Rail, and today I have the huge pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation and reading featuring Ghazal Mosadeq, Jaberha, Khashayar, Kess, Mohammadi, and Fran, standing in for our beloved Rail contributor and publishing in transit co-host Cole Swensen today will be our managing editor, Charlie Schultz, director of programs, Chloe Stagaman, and myself. And we are thrilled for this dialogue today. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from today. And now to introduce today's guests. Ghazal Mosadeq is a poet, editor, and translator, and the founder of Pamenar Press. Her own work has been published by gammm Press, Tamaas, Litmus Press, and others. She is a member of the editorial advisory board for the Journal of British and Irish Innovative Poetry. Jaberha is an interdisciplinary artist whose works draw upon political, historical, and social themes and often incorporate natural and perishable materials. His works have been featured in over 50 group exhibitions across the world, and Jaberha is also a project manager and coordinator at Raybon Art Center, an independent contemporary arts institute in Tehran. In his own studio, he also collaborates with indie poetry presses, including Pamenar Press. And Khashayar Kess Mohammadi is a queer Iranian-born Toronto-based poetry and translator. They are the author of 4 poetry chapbooks and 3 translated poetry chapbooks. Their full-length collaborative poetry manuscript G is just out from Pamenar Press, and their full-length collection Daffodils is forthcoming from Pamenar. And Fran is the former Judith E. Wilson Poetry Fellow at Cambridge University and the author of 13 poetry collections. She is a member of the new editorial advisory board for the Journal of British and Irish Innovative Poetry, and she edits the Soul Food column for Columnist Review. And I'm now going to pass things over to Chloe to get started on the dialogue.
Hi, everybody, and thank you to Pamenar Press for today's Publishing in Transit, which is a monthly series on the Rail's new social environment, hosted by our beloved Rail contributor, Cole Swensen. Publishing in Transit offers us a way to celebrate presses who we really admire, and to hear about the hard work and dedication that goes into giving poetry to the world. And so I just would love to welcome everyone. We have a tradition within Publishing in Transit of starting off with a reading. And the first reading today will come from Khashayar Kess Mohammadi. Thank you, Kess.
Hello. I am going to read, of course, I'm going to read one poem from Daffodils, but I'm also going to read a piece from my book, it's G, but we say it Kha, you know. So from Daffodils. Gypsum, mustard, rye. Funny how the Nordic giants weren't big. I've been taught the practical uses for concrete and all the glances that accumulate at the bas-relief. A sort of gusting smell where dad walks in with a pizza, bumps on the nipple, suck until you see daylight. How boring to know it all erectile dysfunction, or the imagery leading to the pornograph. Naked in midday, as if where buttons bleed, areolas bruise. As if we're in the business of selling footsteps. My new catchphrase is, hun, That's a war crime. We have that in common, huh? Funny, now pins and needles, thread by thread, my sleep tapping in its own tempo. Regardless of how much I move forward, daffodils follow from behind. Windows opened, doors now closed, mostly to vent cigarette smoke and for hugging the sweet corners of the night. We say goodbye motionless, and the more I move on the page, the faster the face dissolves into the crowd. Daffodils organize the protest where I earned my face for the first time. I keep circling the anus for answers to the guilt of survival. It never leaves the center of my being, not the guilt, but the anus. What a myth to find a length that fits, palpable but malleable enough, like how muscles are measured in flex. The angle of marble at the corner of the mouth, sucking. Wait, what happened there in the brine? Hello, piercing. Hi, halitosis. You know, when people are so beautiful, it just ruins your whole day. I couldn't swim. He left me behind. This is from Kh, written with, the book is written in conversation with Montreal poet Claire Duplessis, and I'm going to read one poem from here. Speech. Flute voices, stone bass, teeth in mortar, so carried away from dream chart speech, gone, speaking louder than the soprano and spoken louder too. It's a term in the sublingual dissolve. Your recline and my linguistic incline, only dissected in the dream tongue, you know? When you speak too much, you repeat, and when you repeat yourself, you're insisting. There's a tremor, like a library chair shifting a single floor above, squeaking under the tongue, squeegee the shelf at either end of my speech and a shell. Alive. The singularity of laughter inside that laugh out loud archive. Little talons of speech, little electric nights of spooning the tongue and waking up skinned. I always begin with so much damn ambition. I'm talking to you, but believe me, on the page, I'm speaking, not writing and waking up. Believe me, I can't sleep on the other side of the tongue. I can talk without moving, but can't move. I can laugh without moving, but can't move. Wait a minute. Did I ever tell you we were roommates with a single curtain as a divide? Did I ever tell you you can peek through no matter what I'm doing on the other side? Okay. They all begin weird like this. What can I do about speech but gear up with breath and subdued self, breath and breadcrumbs in and subdividual? Let me see. I want to see. I keep telling you, I don't know the depth of what's lost in writing. The micro-dissolved khat, like khatkesh. Khurush as khame charkh chachi bekhast, the litter of alliteration, investing in rasping of bows and roaring of arrows. I lick with my serrated tongue this envelope that holds every letter and a letter to you. Shuluk, like streets with policy, like the store with customers. How many wars ago was this? Before the divide. Enqalab, from usurp to revolution. Remember the dead, we'll say one day, remembering numbers, but not names, not the line. Thank you.
That was so beautiful. Thank you so much, Kess. Those words were incredible. I can't wait to read more of the book. And our reader now will be Ghazal.
Thank you, Eleanor, and thanks, Kess. I'm going to read part of an unpublished manuscript that, in fact, Kess translated from Persian, and it's called Andarzname. And Kess doesn't like my reading from it because here's the story. He laughs. Well, I wrote it in Persian, and I'm used to reading it in Persian. So when I'm reading it in English, I somehow read it the way it is in Persian, which doesn't work in English. But I don't want to annoy him by reading it, but then I have to thank him for translating it. So please forgive my reading of this, and Kess, I apologize, but I thank you for doing this fabulous job. This manuscript is called Andarzname, as I said. It is in the style of classical advisory literature in Persian. So that's why I'm reading it with my Persian tone. It's, well, I just read some excerpts from it. Sometimes one comes across a picture of a poet she had seen 3 years ago. She sees his new picture with stubble and a beanie. She thinks of herself that she thinks to herself that he's become rather old. Realizing they're the same age later on, she realizes this is an experience everybody has had. And sun reflects off the lake behind the poet. And that she keeps repeating the poet, not to make poetry of one's commemoration, but she just does not remember the poet's name. In these years, I've seen many poets and lakes alike, and I know that even the white clouds spread above the lake each have names, and that we often forget these names or sometimes don't know their names at all. And I swear if this poet sees me, he won't recognize me either. I attended one of his poetry readings, spoke to him after the event, asked the name of his horse. Sometimes I see his pictures of his children. Sometimes one can see pictures of others. The best part is that the entire story is broken. And even he who is sat currently in the auditorium, he who was broken before, he is broken too. And we hear broken music. We are here. We are being heard. We didn't have to break the flower's stem to let light pass through, to let the light inside the stem pour out. We are broken, perhaps because we've broken the stems. Even when we sit, we're hunched over. Have you seen? Sometimes one is sitting, the summer and the window are there, the heat too, but also the breeze. The verdure of the trees is emphasized by the bricks, that too, and that the window is open. We found the stairway behind the building. The weeds grown over cracked rock, the round particles of sunlight, the shadow of the leaf, a dirty broken glass, dust, the threat of dying alone when our children and their children have not been there for years. We found it all, names of objects, their geometry, what we claimed to be fear, but later found to be excitement. We found it all. If they'd let us just one more time, we'd perhaps find ourselves too, passers-by from behind. We'd drag the torn apart bag filled with pumpkins to the end of the street. We'd find a language where we could greet warmly but explain no more. It's possible right now, but a group of people are killing another group of people right now. We found rays of light on stairwell. It wasn't the best time. This Saturday, we found the silence they claim to envelop all little by little amidst conversations. Arranged, the retrieved pieces side by side, The empty spaces weren't us, they were and were not. Particles of light and the glass filled it perfectly. We say the light and the glass perfectly complement the silence. And there's also the fact that she, who saw a long strand of yellow tape on the haggard pine tree on the street and followed that golden path to the windowsill of the building behind the pine, didn't see fit to pass by that image just as dusk has plucked it. She wanted to elaborate, to describe, she wanted to explain it to us. If she didn't have much to say on letting go or on self-restraint, we must confess she had truly messed with us all, insisting on a visual explanation that I swear did not work. We were there too. We too are familiar with the interplay of light with trees and buildings. We too have seen many such shapes. We'd have recognized if there was something there, or at least when she mentioned it would shake our heads. We would have added a point or two, but there was none, none. If we didn't add anything to what she claimed to see, we were respecting what we thought she was liberating. Upon the silence we held, we weren't adding words and letting it expand. But if there was nothing, if she alone easily observed the sliver of light upon objects, and us all only saw 1,000 sorrow hidden behind each word she said, was it not us who summoned a certain misery in her and wished to witness the bound beast of our minds unleashed in hers? If we didn't see ourselves either. If we didn't speak of our own pain, but if we broke her. She was broken. She is broken, still, in long-lasting, continuous light. Thanks.
So beautiful. Really, really special. Thank you so much, Ghazal. That was incredible. And we've got some images now, which kind of tell the story and the history of Pamenar Press and how it came to be. So I'm going to start the slideshow, and Ghazal, we would love to hear from you about these images and hear more about the history of Pamenar and just its story.
Yeah, for sure. Let me just okay. Can you see? Oh, there the cap. I'm looking for captions. They're there. Well, to start talking about Pamenar, well, these are the pictures that from 2015 when there wasn't any Pamenar because we started that in 2019. But these are the pictures of the works that Hamid and I were doing together in Tehran. As people might know, Hamid, our designer, is with us right now, and after I talk a little bit about Pamenar, we'll have a presentation about his work and you know the whole process. But the point is that Hamid is in Tehran, so to work with him on these ephemera and zines projects that we did together, I had to go all the way there. And now our collaboration is just by internet and Zoom and email and all that. So we'll hear from him. But these are the pictures of Tehran. This is a cafe that a friend of us had it there, a venue there. We had readings there, performances, and then we thought about the idea of doing a press together. What we were involved with back then in 2015 was a short-lived venue called Zir Pelle, which is not the name of this cafe. It was the name of that organization, tiny organization by Houman Mortazavi, who We also have Human's picture here, Eleanor, if you can see Human and his assistant, Mr. Nouri. If I click on it, does it? No. That is, yeah, this is the Iranian contemporary artist, and this is his assistant Nouri, who unfortunately 2 weeks ago passed away, and it was one of the smartest cats I ever met, the best cat on earth. My sister would say that. So Human created this venue for ephemeral performances and encouraged people to do zines, and then Hamed himself was doing a lot of bookmaking that he will talk about, and working with book objects in his own office. So we created these workshops on creative translation. Oh, this is Hamed in Bazaar of Tehran, because Hamed and I went all the way to the Bazaar of Tehran buying material for our workshop. There's another image of Hamed in Bazaar of Tehran, and he knows like everyone who sells paper in Bazaar of Tehran. We found letter set with Persian alphabet. Reese Trimble really appreciated it because I brought some for him. So he's writing Welsh, Persian visual poems now. And so this is, yeah, these are the kind of zines that we created back then. And these are envelopes that contain poems. We were putting poems in that, and then we spread it among people to translate, often translate from languages they didn't know. And they're all different translations available there. You can find literal translations. There's some visual translations, and different creative translations. Based on that, we did a performance. I think there's a picture of people in the cafe listening to, oh, this is me at Hamed's office back in 2015 working on the Persian letter set. So this was, yeah, basically the pre-press ideas, just working together and creating things. But the reality is we're living in different spaces. So, and material is very important. Hamed will explain that, we run into lots of difficulties for printing and, imagining actually how a book will look like, because he's designing everything all the way from Tehran, and we're printing it over here in London. Sometimes it takes months till Hamed can see the book that he designed. So he's often very excited, like waiting for, because as Hamed tells me, for a designer, the book is not done before he can, see it in his hand, because there's so many, electronic designs. You really need to see the book to believe it. This is a picture of launch of Pamenar Press, which was in 2019. And I have a very funny story about this sign that you can see here. I consulted with lots of friends about, so I want to start a small press, what should I do? And a friend of mine said, a banner. You need a banner. And I said, okay, so this is the first thing I did. Unfortunately, I'll show you later maybe the pictures of Tracy Grinnell and I with our banners, because then there was a small publishers fair in 2022, and Tracy Grinnell for the first time wanted to come to the fair. And it was my first time too, because the fair was closed because of the pandemic. So I was very excited to go there. And Tracy Grinnell of Litmus Press is asking me, so what in London is needed when you're, going to these fairs? And I said, a banner. So we printed a big banner, and both of us taking our banners there, really standing up, because nobody had a banner, and it took so much space in a Conway Hall, which is very small. So we really embarrassed ourselves, but we have some funny pictures. I can't believe why they're not included. Maybe I send it to you later. But anyways, we had the banner, so we're all there. After that, we printed 27 books. Our focus has been on, this is also one of our readings in London. I believe that was Carla Harriman's launch, or maybe it's Fran's, because everyone's happy. This is Fran's, Fran Locke's launch of Hyena, Jackal, Dog in 2021. And this is Mine, our colleague, who is Mine Kaplangi, organizes our events. And and organizes us all. It's impossible to work without Mine. As I said, what we were trying to do was in the spirit of translation and multilingualism. So the books that you can see we published are either translations or around translation. For instance, Recovery by Vincent Broca, who calls Swensen. Oh, this is one of also our readings in Zoom readings. I think this is a launch of Safa Fathi's Al Hashish. So I'm like, I don't normally remember what I want to say, and I see all these pictures of this is Carla Harriman at her launch. It was in 2002 in June, I believe. And there was a friend of mine with COVID at my home, so I couldn't go there. I was standing at other people's places. Yes, in Eleanor, could we actually stop the slideshow? Because when I look at it, I forget what I wanted to say about the press, and I'm it's just I get excited. I want to tell about the picture, but I really need to name some people here, and then after we all can look at the pictures. But for now, the way that Pamenar runs, well, we have Hamed in Iran and his connections with the small presses and zines there that we learned from their experience. We have Kess in Canada, whom I met in 2022 after actually encountering his publisher, asking about his work, and then they passed me Kess's book. Very strangely, a week later, I met them in a cafe, and since then we've been working together. I'm sure, Kess, you can also add to that about your experience with Pamenar. And then the time that we started Pamenar, I also had a lot of friends, which I still have as advisors, but not many of them who were volunteers with Pamenar Press could continue working. So lots of people come and go in this very poor press that cannot have staff waiting there. But people like Francis Crook, who was there from the beginning, still advises us. Nia Davies from Wales is always helps us. Astra Papachristodoulou is now very involved with her own press, Poem Atlas, but she was a great help in the beginning when we started. Iris Colombo, so she's co-editing Haverthorne Press, but she was among the first people that we gathered our thoughts together when we wanted to start this press. Anna Seferovic right now runs Sun Seekers poetry series here in London, when she invites international poets and holds many readings and performances. Before she starts that, she was helping with events that we organized and workshops as well, because we had a number of workshops, but most of them happened before the pandemic because we couldn't really figure out how to do things on Zoom, so we let that loose. But we had a number of workshops in Canada, in Toronto by Jacob Shire at 401 Richmond building about writing on grief. And before I get more to Canada, I need to also talk about the influences that we had and how we started even thinking about having a press and publishing poetry. For me, it was perhaps starting with attending Crossing the Line reading series here in London, which is a longest running reading series in London. I think it was there since 90s, and it was co-founded by Jeff Hilson and Sean Bonney. Now has a new structure. Iris Colombo also runs that, and they have textual poetry and performance as well once a month. There on those meetings, I met William Rowe, who's the co-publisher of Veer Books, and being in that milieu, he was also my professor of my dissertations of my master's. During, again, the same readings and group of people, I met Chris Cheek, who's a pioneer writer and was a fixture at Bob Cubbing's Writers Forum. And he was a print shop manager for the Consortium of London presses, including Writers Forum and Bill Griffiths's Pirate Press at the Poetry Society. And that was in the 70s. Obviously, I never experienced, I was not born. But shortly after I was born, and I was like, in 2010, when I went to London, I found myself involved in that. Through Chris was also that I learned from the work of Tom Raworth, and as you know, that he was a key figure in poetry revival, British poetry revival, and his approach to zines and presses was something that was very inspiring. Also poets over here like Jeremy Prynne, who publishes extensively but almost exclusively with small presses. There was also a project called VoiceWorks here in London that lots of innovative poets, performance and musicians performed there, and that was organized partly by William Rowe as well. And it was there that Maggie O'Sullivan was invited, and I got familiar with her work and her press, so it was a lot of inspiration already in London when I started thinking. But in terms of more DIY spirit, I learned from Richard Parker, for instance, the founder of Crater Press, about the importance of knowledge with working with letterpress, lithograph, book object. None of them I could learn, so I worked with Hamid. I mean, I understand the importance of learning it, but it's not like I know anything about that. My friend also, João Concha in Portugal, around the same time, a little bit before I started his press, it is very much based on design, Edicios. There was also a reading series here in London that Mark Jackson organized. It was called Guillotine, where he also printed chapbooks of people who read at the reading, which was, and he can put a chapbook together in 2 seconds, like right before the reading, if you're someone who submits things late, like Mark Jackson's there for you. Unfortunately, that reading series is not there anymore after pandemic. Mark didn't continue that. From other inspirations here in London, there's Loughborough Press, who prints with great quality books around the poetics of environmental poetics, and works with poets in London in particular. There's Bad Betty Press by Amy Aker. I basically started this press after a workshop that I went with Amy, and she's very good with she works with younger poets in London, encourages them to write and publishes them, but then with older people, perhaps she encourages them to go ahead and start a press. On the multilinguality of the press, also there were publishers like Sharon Cleveland, who does Ma Bibliothèque, and very much like Pamenar, you can't really spot her. Is Sharon in France or is she in England? And what language the press exactly publishes in, we don't know. I'm hard to spot as well. When am I living in Iran? Am I living in UK? Am I living in Canada? I'm also trying not to clear that too much. But if you're interested, I want to introduce a book on small presses in London to you. It's by Simon Cutts, who ran the Coracle Press, a beautiful artist book press. And this is by Unnameable Books. That will give a lot of insight on small presses in London right now. And as I said, the Small Publishers Fair will start tomorrow for 2 days. So I'm very excited to see other presses there and exchange books. Also in Canada, I know that Kess is going to talk about that, but we worked with Elina Munz, who does brick books, and then in Iran also there are a number of small zines working on, particularly on poetry, especially right now that it's very hard for presses to get permission to publish their books, the censorship issues and all that. There are more and more poets going into self-publishing and publishing each other's work, not getting the permission from the state from them. We can name Lef by, is it Hamid? Is it Lef or Laf? Lam Fe, as it's called, by Sajjad Gudarzi. I haven't seen those books yet, but I know that he's publishing there, the Nashr Herma, and then there is a publication called Matrud, which is always publishes experimental poets in PDF, and Hamid knows them and works with them, but I've only seen the PDF. There's the editorial Var Bazrafgan is also translates. There is a poet, Anima Ehtiyat, who's translated by Kaveh Basiri into English, and I think will be out in the States soon. So yeah, these are the people that we knew about all these places and worked with. Kess, I didn't let you speak.
Before I move on to the Canadian part, I was wondering if you wanted to say a little bit about your own writing before starting Pamenar Press.
Right.
Yourself as a writer.
It's very easy to forget yourself as a writer when you're running a press, because those who have experienced, like putting a book out is just as satisfying as you're putting your own work out. And I am also guilty of not putting enough time on my own writing than the amount of time I'm putting on editing. But what do I say about that? I write in Persian, and I have a book. My book there was out in 2010, but I also have was written essays, and it's also published in Iran. But then also I have published over here in the presses that was mentioned. I translated Mehdi Akhavan Sales, for instance, for Shearsman, an anthology of transatlantic translation. And then we're having a manuscript coming out by Litmus next year. Looking forward to that. And yeah, do I need to say anything specific about my writing? Like, this is brilliant writing. What do I say?
No, I also know you don't really like to discuss your own you really don't like discussing yourself in general. But also, like, before I go on to myself, I wanted to say you read two of my favorites when you
excellent.
and there's now you read the strand of yellow tape. Like that's that's my favorite one. I always read that.
Yeah,
but also like the one that we have talked about several times, the light breeze through the window, and that like great feeling of like little summer breeze. Those are just two poems from that manuscript that I really like. So I'm just gonna go, I know this is a Pamenar Press thing, but I do feel like I need to give a tiny bit of background on myself and how I got to Pamenar and how I got to Ghazal. And the thing is that there are a few things, and it's very interesting for me to see Erin Murray here, because she was a part of what led me to this whole world that
Erin's here.
Yeah, this is she was a great part of the path that led me to this whole path. Yeah, but basically, sorry, I'm jumbling my words, but what I was gonna say is that I started, so, you know, considering how Ghazal always considers me the Canadian part of this whole thing, I started with poetry about 7 or 8 years ago in this city, and in this city being Toronto. I don't know if it's been mentioned that I'm in Toronto, but I'm in Toronto, Treaty 13. And what happened was that I was, by, you know, circumstance, not really by what I was seeking, because I was new and I didn't know what I wanted, but by circumstance, I ended up frequenting three separate reading series and open mics that all were incredibly geared towards performance and multimedia. And none of them exist anymore. They were Facilitate, run by my dear friend Joiani. There was the Sophisticated Boom Boom, which, and then there was Outrageous by Jaberha and Elizabeth Burns. And these were all incredibly, you know, when I think about it, they were incredibly out there. And I remember, you know, going there as like a, you know, about 20-ish-year-old and thinking that this is so cool. This is the stuff you see on the TV, like happening in New York. You know, I mean, you know, it's another thing of like me being a 20-year-old and thinking all the exciting things happen elsewhere, you know, while seeing it happen in Canada. But I'm just going to go through this quickly, which is that what ended up happening for me is that I found a great, I found a little community. Through this community, I got involved with a little small press, again, doesn't exist anymore, called Litmus Press. I started, you know, seeking multimedia artists and experimental writers and I ended up editing a manuscript called Zeus 80. But what that led me to was that led me into a larger exploration of Canadian poetics. And, you know, as I said, like, it led me to some of my favorite things about Canadian literature. And, you know, which is that I first began by the great writings of the Quebecois feminist writers and, you know, world-class, unparalleled writing. And through that, I, of course, got acquainted with Erin Murray and Erin Murray's writing across and through and languages and, you know, these conversations with complex parameters with different authors, different voices, different all these things that I had never heard of or seen. And that led me down this whole path. And, you know, from Erin Murray to Wana Vasilikioi, I slowly got to meet, you know, my dear friend Clara Duplessis, with which we wrote this book. But I kind of consider that a certain flow within Canadian poetics. And one thing I think is very specific in Canadian poetics is, you know, it's how big experimental poetry is. So through that, I got to meet, through that whole small nooks, I got to meet Ghazal. We started, you know, it basically started as a, you know, just simple friendship. We would just read each other poems. We started working each other more and more and more, and just snowballed into, you know, sort of me having a great deal of involvement with the press, you know, started with the smaller stuff, and then it kept going to me. At first, I first, of course, read all the books, and then slowly reviewed, moved on to smaller things, and then, you know, at this point, I'm managing the Pamenar online magazine, and I was looking at the translated works that we have on the Pamenar online magazine, and I realized that all are perhaps something that are most ambitious, are most cross-lingual, are most intricate posts on the magazine are perhaps our most popular, which is, you realize when something is so lacking in the international poetry world, it really finds its audience, because some stuff that I personally would have thought would have been harder to find its audience is actually at the very, very top of what people are seeking from Pamenar, and that's what people come to Pamenar for, to see this, you know, international, intercultural, interlingual, multilingual, cross-lingual, translingual, all the interactions between these. And this is what people come to, like, Pamenar Online Magazine and to Pamenar Press for.
Can I just add a tiny thing, Kess? Kess is also editing the magazine right now, so when people send submissions, it goes to Kess and checks it. Then the reason that we started the magazine with the press is just we had the venue. It was like a blog, and we thought maybe we post some poetry there. It turned to be the magazine because it was great that we could use the electronic versions of poems. Then we could include performances and sound. And when we are talking about translation, of course, we want to have sound and we want to have image and not stick to the textual. So that's the idea came from, basically having a space on in one of the I don't know how Hamed knows what it is, but it's like the website gave us the place to have a blog, and then that became the magazine.
But yeah, that's basically all I wanted to say about my involvement with the press. That's you know, how I came to the press and how what I did with the press, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much for all of that you shared, Kess. We have an amazing presentation now from Hamed, which I'm going to share with some sound and beautiful visuals. So now we're going to get the chance to hear from Hamed.
First of all, I'd like to thank Brooklyn Red and our dear host called Swensen for hosting me, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending our session. I've pre-written and pre-recorded this message for our session because presenting in English is a challenge, and also because I don't have a stable internet connection. I hope my internet stays stable enough so I can answer any questions that may arise during the session. Before I begin speaking of my practice, I'd like to briefly introduce myself. I am Mohammadi Jaberha, the lead designer for Pamenar Press. I have been involved with Pamenar Press from the very beginning. I am responsible for typesetting and designing every book that Pamenar has put out since its first publication in 2019. I've been invited to this session as a member of Pamenar Press. However, before I get to my work with Pamenar, it's necessary to explain what brought me to book design in the first place. I've spent my entire artistic practice wandering through the arts and involving myself in a variety of disciplines that may be considered different from another. I've involved myself in diverse fields of study and practice, finding inspiration in a variety of concepts. But I've often found myself returning to the theme of decay and nature. I measure decay in time and duration, presenting my works in direct contact with its audience, welcoming its decay. Nature finds its way into my work, either in an indirect way or in a direct tactile sense. In my 2017 artwork Essayhomo, for example, the bones of a dead fish have been used in the spine of the work. The audience is actively encouraged to handle the book, and doing so places the fish bones in direct contact with the palm of their hands, a sensory impression that persists as they interact with the artwork in the book object itself. Observing how such sensory input can influence the audience's experiences, I began seeking the art of bookmaking. Since the book was an object with inherent expectations of touch and handling, I consider my involvement with bookmaking another act of wandering, a wandering into a new medium, sure, but also wandering among new ideas, new influences, and new ways of thinking. This very meandering is what interests me the most in the arts. I'd also like to mention how history, politics, and culture are absolutely essential to my practice. By culture, I don't mean a certain tradition, but the very process of tradition making itself. That's what draws me to Pamenar as well. How every Pamenar writer comes to the press with a certain attempt at tradition making, forcing me to adapt to each and every project. I therefore become tasked with keeping a certain ambience that represents Pamenar while staying true to the author's vision. When I began creating artist book, I was suddenly concerned with creating contrast between the book as an object and the subject matter at hand. In my 2017 project, Aesthetic of Inquisition, the depicted torture implements created for cutting, breaking, and piercing the body are in stark contrast with the soft surface of the foam that they are printed on. This concept of the contrast is something we often explore with Pamenar as well, like in Once on Barukua's Recovery, for example, translated by our host called Swensen. We created a contrast between the different sections of the book, bringing a new aesthetic dimension to each of the 5 sections in a way that didn't really exist in the original French text. As I've mentioned before, I'm fascinated by the idea of decay and decomposition. I love the impression that every visitor can leave on the object that they touch, from streaks to pens and fingerprints. All such deformations and over time decompositions of the artwork is exactly what I'm interested in. So I often present my artwork in a way that the audience can interact with if they want. For years I was designing posters, but around 2009 I became involved in the textual work and familiarized myself with book design. Keeping in mind I dislike seeing designers' footprint being invasive and disregarding their readers' interaction with the book. Such works contain design that, though very aesthetically involved, might be inaccessible for the reader. I was always against such invasive design that meant to draw attention to the footprint of designer rather than properly guide the reader. I, however, adapt to every project. I don't like to leave behind a palpable footprint. A great catalyst in my work was when I was commissioned by the national newspaper Hamshari to study the history of a visual project and engage in the entire artistic hierarchy of design. Thinking as an artistic director rather than artist, I began contemplating how I could approach books more as an artistic director rather than a graphic designer. It meant that for the first time I was responsible in bridging various contributions to the project and bringing them together as a coherent structure. I learned the importance of clear communication between contributors to each book project. When I became involved with Pamenar, I was confronted with a new challenge. I had to familiarize myself with global design language, or Western design as it is also known. Considering how my practice was previously more directly in dialogue with Persian and Arabic alphabet, I felt the need to further explore schools of design that were specifically created around the Latin alphabet. Of course, the term Western design is a very reductive term here, sometimes interchangeable with contemporary design, other times more directly interchangeable with certain trends in international design that take over. I simply became more involved in European design, trying to find a synthesis between my practice and what I was presenting to a European audience. By working with Pamenar, I had so many things to draw upon. First, there was the author's intent. Then there is Pamenar's general ethos, and I could draw upon the work itself and create a synthesis of all contributing factors to present a coherent design. As to tell you a bit about our process, before beginning every project, our publisher Ghazal provides me with a personal introduction. Then I sit with the work myself for a while and with a mixture of my own interpretations. They are sometimes not exactly what the author intended, but are always drawn from the content. I begin to create the book. Pamenar is a press that presents its own discipline and ethos in every project, but at the same time is in deep conversation with its authors on the creation of its books. I always have a certain aesthetic understanding of each project, yet we always ensure that the author's aesthetic understanding of the book is met. We never enforce our own aesthetics on the authors. We bridge between the author's vision and our discipline. We began with a very minimal approach to book design, but little by little we started to create an aesthetic language for our books. Perhaps the first book that truly represents the visual language of our press is Fran Hyena-Jekyll-Dye. Our minimalist approach began to truly synthesize with my personal design language. I always consider the book to be a space that the reader travels through, so the book becomes an architectural space to be traversed. I always remember the traditional Iranian houses where the visitor is led through many chambers before they are introduced into the interior of the house. Hyena-Jekyll-Dye was approached similarly. When I began introducing the interior of the book little by little, creating new dividers, providing breathing space for the reader before entering the bulk of the interior. Another example would be to work with Once on Baruko on Recovery. This book is on translation, non-translation, and mistranslation. The book looks at translation with the lens of queerness. Therefore, the book called for a queer design. The content was multilingual, playful, and contained various references to music, not to mention the sonic capacity of multilingualism itself. The Pamenar team, alongside the author Swensen and the translator called Swensen, decided to create a playful design for the book. Each chapter of this book is in a different font, depending on what that chapter aims to reveal. Another instance of creative design was while working with Safo Fathi, an international essayist, poet, and filmmaker. We decided to incorporate the stills from the cine poem she made around the idea of the book, while also providing a QR code of that film inside the book. There is an important issue to consider when we look at our book's design, considering how I never directly oversee the printing and binding process, being all the way here in Iran. There are certain design decisions made to reduce printing errors. We also always aim to expand the multimedia possibilities for our books, often introducing digital elements. Carla Harriman's Cloud Cantata, for instance, starts with a QR code leading the readers to a sonic performance of Carla and the noise musician John Olson, while Susan Gevirtz Burns incorporate the radio plays and performances inside the book. In general, my work with Pamenar has been a direct continuation of my tendency towards wandering among disciplines. Pamenar's authors come from many different countries and disciplines, and each project forces me to adapt to an entirely new design language to create an appropriate language for the book at hand.
Ahmed, that presentation was absolutely stunning and just so illuminating and inspiring. Thank you so much for preparing it and for sharing it with us today. It was, yeah, we're so grateful. And of course, the mic is yours if you would like to say anything further at the moment. If we also have a question from Charlie, who can also jump in to ask.
Thanks so much, Eleanor, and thanks, Kess and Ghazal and Ahmed. There was such inspiring presentations. One of the things that I really got curious about watching all the different books that Ahmed included in his presentation was how you go about thinking about building your yearly publication program. I mean, I know that the press is young, and if I could ask two questions, I would ask that one. And then my second would be, I'm really impressed by the fact that one person is in the UK, one person is in Canada, one person is in Iran. And it's not lost on me at all that if you began in 2019, you had to pivot just like all the rest of us into a world of virtual platforms. And it seems like you did that very successfully. So I guess the two things that I would love to hear you speak a little bit more about, and this is a question to all of you, is how do you think that being in those three different places and being forced through the scenario of life to use these new tools, how do you think that had an effect on your collaboration and maybe the selection process and how you build your publication schedules? And I know I said a lot, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, who wants to start? Kess, maybe you or I do. Well, okay, being in different places. Well, yeah, it was, I think I couldn't see any way. I used to work with all because I incorporate a lot of visuals into my own writing. And because Hamid and I had worked together, so I couldn't see any other, that was of course before the pandemic, but I couldn't imagine any other way to work with him other than working online and exchanging material electronically. But the reason that the press is in Canada as well, even before we met with Kess and before him joining the team in 2022, is because I constantly go back and forth to Canada. I was born and studied in Iran till, I was graduated in Iran from the law school, and then went to Canada in 2002 to forget about all my education and get involved in broadcasting in a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and writing. So I lived there till 2010. Then I came to London, but I can't say I even have been 100% here because I'm again in back and forth in London and Canada. So for me, it always has been this moving in between places and being from so many different places, basically. So maybe that's the way my brain works, but then it happens to be everyone's brain, because see how Kess adapts to all this, and Hamed, who has been working with his friends internationally. I believe that Hamed, you're going to say goodbye to some friends, right, today? There's a going away party. So they're artists that lived in Iran and are not right now, that Hamed is in touch with them. So he's really used to work internationally and find ways around doing that. But as you said about the so many publications from 2019 till now, I have to be honest with you, that's because we didn't know how to do it. We just received submissions. We got really excited about them, and we had Hamed to generate all these ideas with. And I'm not a very practical person. I'm a person who just, learns by doing things. And so that's how we went ahead. And my understandings of financials also was thinking that, well, small press is something that is money in, money out. So you really don't need to apply for any grants. To this day, we are not publicly funded because I don't know how to do that. So it's just we are perhaps doing things and learning doing that by doing them. Yeah, it wasn't organized. It wasn't like planned to have these many books by now. But this year we had 9 books, and we are trying to pace ourselves. And also, I think somebody mentioned Reese's name in the chat. I don't know who was that. Somebody asked for Reese. Okay, so you'll be the first one who see Reese's work by Pamenar, because it's not out yet. So this is going to be launched tomorrow at the small press fair.
And also, I just sorry.
Just want to say Rhys Trimble, for those who don't know, is a Welsh poet and works multilingually. And these are transcripts of his performances and experiments with language and translations. It's called Core Translation from Extempore.
I just wanted to say that Ghazal, you're, as always, you're being, you're being extremely, you're showing your humility. Of course, there's I know that you got into it, but like we're in the process of getting the public funding and getting all those things going little by little, and we have a lot of great patrons that have helped us a lot throughout the years. Sorry, you're muted. And like we got
No, I'm just saying, yes, I did imagine. I did not say that. Yeah.
Yes. And
we had support.
It's been great. And I know that it's just you're a very humble person, but you have done a great deal for this press,
I'm going to follow up with Charlie's question with a question for Fran, but for all of you to answer in your own way as writers. I'm curious how Pamanar's locations and also just diversity across the press and across the languages and translations is an opportunity for you specifically as a writer, Fran, or how that's enriched your practice as a writer.
That's a really good question. I think I sort of feel in some ways a bit of an odd one out because I only have English, and there are some that would argue I don't have that with any sort of depth of facility. But I am in transit in the sense that we've always moved around, and I've never felt sort of completely at home in the language that I do have. And the approach of a lot of Pamenar authors seem to me to be finding ways of using English and bringing that sort of defamiliarizing sensibility of translation to English, and a way of kind of using it. I always have this phrase for it, which is like to use English to unmake the pain of English, that I don't want to have the English language in some ways, that it always seems kind of trying to sort of resist or evict me. And I think what Pamenar has often, what I've learned from working with the press and working with Hamed as well, who has found this wonderful kind of, I've had the book here, the new book, The Disgusting Lie, to find this sort of visual language for addressing the same concerns that I talk about thematically in the poetry, sort of perishability, vulnerability, and violence. I think it's found I found a way of kind of using English and also feeling maybe connected to a sort of broader community places that, you know, I've never had the opportunity to go. I've never had the financial wherewithal to go anywhere. So it's very nice to feel part of a sort of international scene in a way that wouldn't otherwise have been kind of available to me.
I love that answer. I don't know if anyone else wants to respond.
I just want to add something to what Fran is saying, which is that I want to connect it to what Hamed was saying, which Hamed always says, well, what I like about Pamenar is that people come to Pamenar with a certain sense of tradition making. And well, you know, Fran Locke's High in a Jackal Dog was the first book I read. And that whole idea of like the tradition making of like the beastly detachment / beastly attachment / all that idea of like it's a whole tradition making that Fran Locke brings to the press, and like a lot of people do with Pamenar, they're all trying to create their own tradition within this press and within their own practice. I don't want to undermine people's own practice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much for those answers. Eleanor, do you want to close us out with your question, and then we'll open it up to the audience?
Yeah, thank you, Chloe. Thanks, Charlie. Those were both really amazing questions. And of course, thanks to Kess and Hamed and Ghazal and Fran for all that you've shared. For the final question I want to ask you all today is about both I would say the founding and the future of Pamenar Press. I'm wondering, and I would be curious to hear from all of you, on what kind of gap does Pamenar Press fill in the world of poetry and publishing? You know, thinking about the unique positionality as we've been hearing about, both geographically and in terms of content, and you know, kind of what the future of that could look like or will look like, if that makes sense. And I would love to hear, since we have represented here so many different roles and relationships to the press, it would be great to hear about how it connects to your individual practices in the context of Pamenar Press.
Oh, maybe Fran, if you could start, and maybe we can all say a little bit if you want.
Yeah. So thinking about, I don't know that there's a kind of niche or it's fitting, but I think of it in terms more if there is a sort of a gap that the press is bridging, where I don't see poets writing with as much kind of force or license as Pamenar poets do, really, anywhere else. It's sort of become a kind of go-to place where you can phrase thoughts and ideas that are maybe kind of, I don't want to use a sort of noxious kind of growth mindset kind of phrase like outside the box, but it's more than that. It's like it's fucked off over the wide horizon and has built its own box and has established a kind of queer, glorious queer commons in that box. But I think that there is a lot of sort of quote unquote experimental poetry that feels very cold and very dead. And feels very arid to me. And I find that sort of Pamenar Press, Pamenar books are exciting and alive and vital and vigorous in a way that I think, I don't know, that a lot of contemporary experimental poetry, at least not the stuff that I've encountered, feels.
If I can take from there the idea of experimental literature, but when we're thinking about experimental literature, we also, it's not English only. We have to think about different experiments. And what I think Pamenar has tried to focus on is into translating the experiment and to translating, you know, from different languages. And it's not very easy to translate experimental poetry. And it hasn't been a focus on that because there's a lot of focus on translation of mainstream poetry. That is not even successful, let alone there'll be translations of poetry that doesn't really fit the mainstream. And we wanted to explore that. So with the poets that we translated, well, Safa Fathi, for instance, who translated her own work, it has been a challenge, that the challenges are hers and Patrick Love to translate, but this is going between Arabic, French, and English, and then finding, you know, and then, you know, recomposing it in English. The help that we could do with Al Hashish, and the book is here, Hamid showed you some slides of the book. It's what we could do in Pamenar, and in what Fran was perhaps referring to as unleashing, because we always encourage the writers to do whatever you want, and we try to make it possible. Hamid says, I like challenge, just go for challenging ideas. We decided, along with Safa, for instance, in editing this book, that for lines of the book to not, some of them are center justified, for them, for instance, to slide a little bit on each other, and reading it, you also feel the experience of being intoxicated, being on hashish, but it's not that very obvious that if you look at the first glance, it's not center justified, it's just unsettling. And this wasn't in the original text, it just came to me with a glitch. And I found it that's very interesting. It's really unsettling. It's not really center justified. So I talked to Hamid and Safa, and three of us decided to just actually typeset it weird. So experiences like that you have to you think about bringing the translation, the experience of translation into typesetting, design, and to making the book was one of the ideas of the press, and we are working on it. No, Kess?
I agree with everything you say, but I'm gonna say something a little bit more cold and technical, which is that something that the guerrilla aspect of Pamenar's structure does is that I think in the presses that I know and the presses that operate, a lot of funding for presses, a lot of specifically public funding for presses, is very bound to nationalist geographies. And I think what Pamenar does to really explode that is to say, you know, and that's also something that Pamenar has issue with, because of how much international we are. We have issues with centralized fundings because none of them, you know, sometimes don't accept, you know, when you have more than a certain percentage out of that geography. I think that is, again, like I because you both said so well the parts that are, you know, more with the artistic side and with the expression side, I'm just going to say the, you know, cold logistics, which is sometimes, you know, where the money comes in. Sometimes that's how books get printed, so it's something incredibly important, but it's maybe not as exciting to discuss. But it is a truth that a lot of funding is bound to geographies and to nationalist ideologies of experiments, for example, you know, the same way that Pamenar says, you know, we translate our experiments, you know, an experiment in the UK is not the same as experimental literature in, you know, Mexico or Chile, because these experiments move with the nationalist, with the national literary movements. Anyway, so that whole idea that I think what Pamenar really creates is that space outside of nationalist funding institutions for a writing that is not bound by those nationalist funding. But yeah.
No, that is very correct. We're not you know, ready to sacrifice and reduce our practice into like ticking some boxes that brings funds. But in the experiment aspect that you said and translation, I had this conversation with the editor of Teflon magazine in Greece, that she was talking about experimental writing and translation, but was telling me that you should know that we don't have an experimental writing here, as it's said, and we don't really want to fit to what is, you know, called experimental literature and present ourselves. We have radical poetry, and that is our experiment. I really liked what you heard. So if you know, a press is called as experimental press, then maybe a radical writer in Athens wouldn't be interested in participating, and wants rather have more respect on what they are experimenting in their own radical writing.
I'm going to ask this quick question, and I know we have a question from our friend in the audience, GE, for you all. But I really enjoyed watching Hamed's video about the design process and about creating a space and thinking about the books as architectures and as these meanderings. And I wanted to open that up to all of you to respond to, and how the design process has impacted and led to a sense of discovery with each of these texts that you're making, because it's a really beautiful process and part of Pamenar.
Thanks, but unfortunately,
Oh, there was
I'm hearing
Hamed.
you
Okay.
by a little delay. Sorry, I couldn't understand well what you said about the design. Maybe Ghazal help me.
Yes. Could you please repeat the question, so maybe we translate for Hamed?
Yeah, my question is simply, how has it been for all of you working collaboratively in the design process as a team? And, you know, I imagine that leads to many discoveries, both to the design process, but also to the writing process.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
حامد جون میگن که چجوری توی جمع کار میکنیم. میخوای من اینو بگم دیگه، با هم دیگه صحبت کردیم.
Yeah, please, please.
Okay,
Ghazal says, yeah.
Yeah, it was, as you mentioned briefly in Hamed's presentation, that when we first accept a manuscript, then we want to start working on it. I talk about the idea of the manuscript with Hamid. That's easier. So all the books that are sent to us are going through translations anyway, because it's discussed in Persian, and then we go back to English. So I talk about the idea of the book and the author, and then Hamid reads the manuscript. We sometimes read together. For instance, the entire book of This Energy Wasted by Flight by Loti LS. The whole book, I was reading it when Hamid was designing it. It's such I love this book, so I enjoyed reading, but I read the entire book when he was doing his artwork online. So yes, we talk, we discuss, and then we design. The process usually is that Hamid decides on some fonts and a layout and sends a sample of 20 pages to the author, and then the discussion starts from there, unless the project is more collaborative and contains, like a project that we are working on right now, that there are many performances, so we have to all of us get together and talk about it from the very beginning. Another thing that we are working on, if Erin's still here, is her translation of, fabulous translation of Shespara's lecture in Galician, which is going to be published bilingually in Galician and English on PDF online, available to download for everyone. And we are really privileged to have this amazing text on hand and work on.
Wonderful. Thank you for that question, Chloe. Thank you, Hamid. Thank you, Ghazal. That was really great to hear about. As Chloe mentioned, we do have a question from the audience from our friend GE. GE, if you'd like to share your question, now is a great time.
Thank you so very, very much. I love the press, and I love so many of these authors. Question is, though, the thing that first got me interested in the press to begin with was the fish. And how did you happen to select the illustration of the fish, which is the devil Jack Diamond fish, which has this amazing history story in American naturalism?
Okay, the fish. So that is my sole visual contribution to this whole press, because it was the fish that I found in Ajaibul Makhluqat, Wonders of Being, which is a lithograph print of it in Qajar era that I found. And I was in love with this fish. And you know the Book of Wonders of Beings, and the one that Borges was also influenced by. So I told Hamid that, what do? I'm in love with this fish. Hamid said, this is our logo then. So yeah, this is from a Qajar print, dynasty print of Wonders of Beings. One of the strange animals.
It actually goes back further than that. It's actually by John Audubon, because he was trying to trick a naturalist by the name of Constantine Samuel Raffin-esque, who was an itinerant naturalist in the United States in 1818, to believe that there was this mythical fish in the Ohio River. So he drew this picture, Audubon did, put it into his sheath, let Raffin-esque find it. Raffin-esque said, I've got to find this fish, and actually spent a year or so looking for this mythical fish, which was John Audubon's joke on Samuel Raffin-esque. So I just thought there was, this
Are you sure it's the same fish though? Because that's from Wonders of Beings, which is much older text.
But they got it from there. It's an Audubon, yeah, right, it's in the Smithsonian. It's in the Smithsonian, and it's a very famous story, but it's just so mind-boggling.
I have no idea about that story.
Yeah, because Raffin-esque was an immigrant, and it's a whole colonial story, because Audubon was definitely trying to get one over on this itinerant immigrant naturalist, which is
wow,
mind-blowing. Yeah. But thank you.
I wonder why the fish attracted me, but that's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, GE, for that question. Thanks, Ghazal. Not sure if anyone else wants to say anything about the logo. Feel free if you would like to. But if not, we will be concluding today. And again, first, thank you so much to Chloe and Charlie for your questions. Thank you so much to Ghazal, to Kess, to Fran, and to Hamed for your incredible contributions today and for telling us about the amazing work of Pamenar Press. To conclude today, we're so excited to have a reading from Fran Locke. So Fran, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you for having us. Thank you for publishing this amazing book. And thank you to Hamed here. This is the first time Hamed and I have ever seen each other. So thank you so much, Hamed, for all the wonderful work that you did on this book. I'm going to read from it now. I'm going to read poems that I don't normally read. And this is Dog Woman after Paula Rego. How the tail is a dictator, perversely mocking the dog that wags it. Lover, consider whom your hand is nursing, the milky husbandry of sorrow, all of pity's feely fox. The tail lurks behind me, most unbending thought. Dear one, to be a Disney punishment made of myself, the tail is a smile, my meek lever jerked, is any favor pinned to party. Do you like it? My crooked haunch, the falsified fur of bitch, my star splayed for your gaze. My tongue skims the golden room from your eye. The tail is a blackthorn shillelagh, is a hoax wand waved to slow concussion. Lie in the manger of my mauling, capitulating, bruised. Pain sprints by in weak chaotic multiples. I am the sighthound of its flight, thready scent I follow into sick rooms, wet sheets all the way down. Tongue swims upstream toward its psalms, saliva flicked infects inflections, bedside schmutz, coyote's lordless elegy. The tail is an oar, as a mast, as an anchor, dog as a ship, come never to shore. The human suit goes walking, by which I mean this feeling device, software, the capable whole, the suffering jacket, her gaunt booty canted, a rosy machine. The hot normal is a whore's arbor, the vacuum that nature abhors is livid fish eye, stink eye, spit ropes, night shift, night shaft, the perforated cherry subtly fingered. Disaster glues the gilded wet of her in place, the world unbraiding its fait accompli, one intestine at a time, a funny how. A pillow slip filling with wet feathers. A line of pastel sparrows sewn together, rose decals in hygienic motels. The world grows a girl on it like mold, 10 eyes oinking, men coquetting their hard-on through a hole in a sheet, through a slit in the wall. Men put scented bayonets, the pig part of sticking. The human suit to be hospitable, dismantled, run. See how many glowing shanks on the pyre. Once her lulled on a gurney, once a chaser of tar to seal the speaking wound in her back, in her life, in her flame retardant nightie, in her temple garments. Look, sucking the sauce from the spare rib she is whittled from, disgusted. The ash of her pale aniseed. He has finally reached the limits of the edible. It's called Black 22. Last year wasn't a very good year for anyone, so these are just my feels about that. So in the end, they will eat their own. Blanket and railing. If you think they won't, you are so wrong. Never mind. You're tired all the time. Your name is leaking from the sly, puckered mouths of your affluent frenemies. There is an obscure pain, a hot obstruction in the mouth, in the bowel, and how to go on. The peeling skin of you is socially sown. You sweat this winter undertaking. I swear these English eat their own. Oh, starry-eyed economies, the forced spite swallowed in a wimpy text, doubled up to the bent scope of a wiry, tarry thought. You bank their dirty normal, Take it inside, save it for later. Your hunger is climbing the black rungs of an onion while Jamie Networth Oliver tells you how to break yourself up over a blue flame for under £1. You will scrape the spent heat from your duvet as the nightmare exceeds your defeat is thrashing. You are tired all the time, so graciously mortgaged, so softly despairing in the silk pajamas of your dead seal. You carry your rage on your back like a failed parachute falling, like a failed suicide drifting to earth, a determined feather. You weigh next to nil. There is no food. They have sharpened the songbirds, the sobbirds, the weasel teeth of ego, the bagging hook's patient caresses. In the end, you'll slump in the dark, strewn and rouge, staring the pinhole down. You will open yourself like a bloodshot eye, cabbage white curses flicking all over you. You are the pre-loved coin of your own realm, dry humping your nothings to sweetness. Oh, metered screw, oh, sundered flop, oh, dusty byword. If you can, she will blow the machine to tokens, spooning the ready honey of yourself into their holes, the failed claims dug and your gold rush. If you can't, then on to the side hustle of a stopped heart, to the Amazon mantras of a mindfully fuck doomed food, and Jeff Networth B-sauce as your personal fucking rain cloud, as your household god, curling a jeweled shit in your hearth. I'm not trying to frighten you, but you must be ready, your stomach spilling open, its warm rake of ash, its scald of air, its sawdust mountain of mouldy bangers. Oh, cadaver girl, we were lions, we could fit this light bulb moon in our mouths. Now look, this Angoland, this nasty salivatrix smoothing her hair, dressed in a mail of cancelled wansers. They are not men, they are zombies in heat. They don't eat because they're hungry, they eat because they can, and we are hanging like cured meat inside a life of airless viral humiliations. We were warriors, would trample them, all open foes, all sugared sneaks, in a gown of heaving weather. Be the dressed axe enter this cutting fold. And I'm going to finish with a couple of poems from, there's a section of this book called Dead Girl Industrial Complex, and this is from that. This book is longer than I thought it was. Drowning, not drowning. To find me, plausible and aspiring in a relevant dress and full of promise. Oh, internet, oh, Tumblr, at 20 your sunniest meme is a church I enter, mouthful of feigning I will be well. To find me so, industrious and suffering, sweet bean or sesame, darkest soy and oyster sauce I squeeze from me. My pores are little sepulchres, my face is thick with foreign bodies, my face is foreign bodies you don't know except you do. I do not know anything, weary and sleek at 3 a.m, what it is to be so heavy with luster that you can't even. In my vault of suspect valentines, a boy whose kiss is an absolute brat and wants what it wants. He said I had become intense. He led me not into temptation. In the night, when the body is its realist zoo, couldn't we all use a few of those flavorless mercies? By mercy, a kind of white people tea. You drink it off hot and without sugar. Me, when the heart turns watertight. Me, at half the speed of me. To find you, I won't. Days of lulling wound, I know, when hands cannot comply. Youth is being in the world and the serpent under it. Better to have not been born is the penitent subtext of all our comic fonts. Oh, internet, oh, blog of blogs, a typical silk of self cut on a softer filter over us. Squealing dream at night. I'm unzipping a damsel. I'm climbing in through her face to say yes. And I thought if I could lay my shadow in a stranger's lap, could stretch myself the length of my light reading, I would be sane. I would drain the blank page like solemn milk. I fail by theft, by thrift, by pills, by mania's several devices to find you if anyone could. If I could reach back through the rabbit for the hat. Paranoid, and nobody wants to fuck that thought. Nobody wants to deal. What does it mean to go under, to become sclerite? The spiny element in me, kelps and corals, colonial forms, good sea stalwarts, all down through fleabane, limonium and sweetest vulgare. A red finger gropes for light, Gogonian ghost with plum rose, enemy, anemone, down through thresholds of fatality, where flesh is a territorial fawn and the sea has mouths enough to find us, and you might. in whatever preening days remain to you, not immersed, submerged, of our own crocodile doing. And when it is time to peel this weakness from us, when you are all body, gorged with form, then you'll see, oh dear one, oh internet girl on the internet who never made it, I would give you my growing if I could and none of its pains. The mind is not our fault, at fault. The wreck and the reef, love, the wreck and the treasure.
Thank you so much, Fran. Wow, that was a stunning reading. And thanks again to Ghazal and Kess for your readings earlier and for the insights that you shared on Pamenar. Thank you, Hamed, for the absolutely incredible presentation. And a shout out and thank you to Cole for preparing with us to get us here today. And thanks also to Charlie and Chloe for co-hosting with me today. It's been so fun, such a joy today. Thanks for all that you do. We're so grateful for this hour and a half, 2 hours today. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. And thanks also to the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE programs and for making these conversations possible and for supporting our archive, where this conversation will be posted shortly on our YouTube channel. For the past 23 years, the Rail has been a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Check the chat for a link to donate to support the work we do here at the Rail. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Sydney Vernon, Ty Cooper, and Chloe Stagaman on the event of Vernon's show at CapCap. We are going to conclude with a reading by Victoria and Babazi. Thank you everyone so much again for tuning in. And you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Eleanor.
Thank you,
Thank
Chloe.
you.
Thank you.
That was
Ghazal.
so amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Everyone.
Amazing reading.
Fran. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Ahmed.
Wonderful.
so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Thanks,
Bye,
Cass. Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Bye.
Lovely to
Long
see
live
you.
Pamenar Press.